In a freezing courtroom in Dallas, Judge Jasmine Crockett was slapped across the face by a police officer, right in the middle of an open trial. And 5 minutes later, she began tearing down a corrupt system that had rotted from within for over a decade. That slap didn't just shake the courtroom. It ignited a chain reaction that made the pillars of power tremble, triggered sweeping investigations, and dragged the once untouchable into the harsh light of justice. What could drive a judge to break the silence and risk everything to expose the very system that once empowered her? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The cold wind outside the Dallas federal courthouse felt sharp, like a warning something was about to break. Judge Jasmine Crockett walked into the courtroom, calm but alert. She had once been a well-known civil rights lawyer in Washington, someone who fought hard for justice. Now, as one of the few black women to sit on a federal bench here, she was in the middle of a system that didn't welcome her. People didn't say it out loud, but their eyes said enough. Some stared with quiet challenge. Others avoided her gaze completely. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was full of tension. Jasmine knew this wasn't just another case. This was a fight, and she had to be ready. The courtroom was dead silent, too silent. Jasmine Crockett had just finished reading the opening statement for what was expected to be the most watched police misconduct trial in the state's recent history. Sergeant Victor R. Boone, the defendant, stood accused of using excessive force during a traffic stop that ended in the death of a 19-year-old unarmed black teenager named Elijah Trent. Body cam footage had conveniently been lost. Witnesses had been pressured into silence. And for 2 years, the case was buried, until a whistleblower leaked internal reports showing Boone's repeated history of violent arrests, all swept under the rug by his department. Now, with the country watching, Jasmine was tasked with bringing clarity and control to what had become a symbol of everything broken in the justice system. She adjusted her glasses and nodded for the bailiff to proceed when it happened. Victor Boone stepped forward, not in a subtle, courtroom formal way. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for his lawyer. He simply walked, 3 slow steps forward, until he stood within arm's reach of the bench. People barely had time to register it. The courtroom guard blinked but didn't move. Jasmine lifted her chin, ready to ask what he was doing. Then crack. The slap came so fast it didn't feel real. Boone's hand connected with Jasmine's face with a force meant not just to hurt, but to humiliate. The sound bounced off the marble walls like a rifle shot. Jasmine's head snapped slightly to the left. A hush swept through the room, so complete it was suffocating. No one screamed. No one stood. Not a single flash from the press pit went off. For a few seconds, the entire courtroom was paralyzed, not out of confusion, but fear. Boone didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He just stood there, eyes cold, breathing steady, as if daring the system to react. And then he spoke, voice dripping with mockery. "There. Now we're even, Your Honor," he said, each word slow, sharp, coated in disdain. "You want to judge me? Try doing it without hiding behind that robe. We both know you don't belong in that seat." He smiled. A crooked, smug, "I dare you" kind of smile. The kind of smile that said he thought he'd just won. He wasn't just striking a judge. He was striking the symbol of everything he believed shouldn't be in power. A black woman in the highest seat in the courtroom, holding him accountable. The clerk's hands trembled. A juror's pen rolled to the floor, but no one reached to pick it up. One of the defense attorneys muttered something under his breath, pale as a sheet. The tension was no longer just in the air. It was in everyone's bones. The sharp burn on her cheek had barely faded when Jasmine Crockett made her move. She didn't ask for order. She didn't raise her voice. She simply straightened her spine, stared down the man who had just struck her, and turned the moment into a command. "Bailiff," she said, calm but cutting, "retrieve the full personnel file of Sergeant Victor R. Boone, effective immediately." The room stayed frozen. Even the court reporter had paused, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Jasmine didn't break eye contact with Boone, who stood smug, shoulders square, as if waiting for her to crack. "Not from the district attorney's office," she added louder now. "Go straight to internal affairs. I want the full record, unredacted, and I want it before this session resumes." Her voice echoed through the courtroom like a challenge, and suddenly everyone realized this wasn't over. It had just begun. The bailiff moved quickly, but his steps were heavy, as if carrying more than just duty. Jasmine remained still. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't blink. She only waited. Every camera was now trained on her. Every journalist was typing without looking down. Even the defense team sat paralyzed. It took less than 15 minutes for the file to arrive, a sealed manila folder, thick with documents, rubber banded like a brick. The bailiff handed it to her with trembling fingers. Jasmine took it with steady hands. She placed it on the bench, unfastened the band, and opened it slowly, page by page, like peeling back a lie. Her eyes scanned the contents, and the lines on her face hardened with every second. Page after page of glowing performance evaluations, commendation letters, and basic patrol logs. But something was missing, everything that mattered. No mention of the Elijah Trent stop. No reference to the 2021 incident involving a homeless veteran beaten during a mental health call. Not one complaint, not one internal review, nothing. It was immaculate, too immaculate. A file this clean didn't just raise red flags, it reeked of cover-up. She flipped back to the front and read the officer history line by line. There were gaps, 6-month stretches without any logged activity, sections where the formatting didn't match, mismatched fonts, misaligned margins. Amateur mistakes, but damning ones. Jasmine's voice, when it came, was low and steady. "This file," she said, holding up a page, "claims that Sergeant Boone was on administrative leave during the week of July 3rd, the same week Elijah Trent was killed during a stop he initiated. The date is typed, but the signature block is blank." Her gaze turned to the prosecution table, where the district attorney looked visibly uneasy. "Can someone explain to the court," she continued, "why this record shows Boone wasn't working, while our forensic data, GPS logs, dispatch audio, and witness statements place him at the scene?" No one answered. She pressed further, her voice rising just enough to shake the room. "And why does this file contain 0 use of force reports? Not one notation? Not even a disputed arrest?" She flipped through another dozen pages rapidly. "We have public complaints. We have video leaks. Yet according to this document, Boone is a model officer with a spotless record." She looked directly at the assistant DA, who now sat still, eyes wide. "Either this file has been altered," Jasmine said, "or someone has been feeding this court falsified documents." The courtroom erupted, not in sound but in tension. You could feel it tighten like a wire. One juror shifted in their seat. Another whispered something under their breath. Even Boone's attorney leaned back, face pale. The moment felt unreal, like a mask was being pulled off something that had always been hidden in plain sight. Jasmine didn't sit. She didn't breathe deep. She doubled down. "Let me make this perfectly clear," she said, standing tall behind the bench, file open in both hands. "This court will not be manipulated. I don't care who prepared this file, who signed off on it, or whose name is on the last page. If there has been tampering, there will be consequences." She paused, and in that silence, everyone in the room knew. This wasn't just about Victor Boone. It was about the walls that had protected him, and those walls were now cracking, one page at a time. Jasmine didn't sit. She didn't blink. With the false file still open in front of her, she reached under the bench and retrieved a sealed plastic envelope from the court clerk's evidence tray. It was small, unassuming, a flash drive, black, scratched along the edge, barely larger than a paperclip. But what it contained, she knew, had the power to blow the walls off the courtroom. "This was submitted anonymously," she announced, her voice deliberate, clear, and deadly calm. 48 hours ago, no return address, no request for credit, just a drive, labeled with one word, listen. She glanced at the IT technician sitting to her left. "Please load it into the courtroom monitor system. Play it from the beginning." "No edits." The technician hesitated, then inserted the drive. The screen blinked and the courtroom speakers crackled to life. Static. Then the sound of a door opening. Footsteps. And then Boone's voice. Clear, identifiable, unmistakable. "You get that footage wiped?" What footage? Another male voice asked, shaky. The body cam, Trent. Don't play dumb, I told you. Delete it. Nothing on record, nothing to explain. A pause. Jesus, Vic, you shot a kid. Another pause, then Boone again. Cold, flat. You want to keep your job or not? The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. No one in the room dared move. Jasmine reached forward and tapped the spacebar, freezing the playback mid-sentence. Then she looked slowly, methodically, across the courtroom, from the prosecution to the jury box to the press pool. There is no version of this audio, she said softly, that can be explained away as anything but what it is. A man trying to cover up the killing of an unarmed minor, and a system letting him do it. She gave them all a full 3 seconds to sit with that. But before she could continue, Boone slammed his hands against the defense table, the wooden echo crashing through the silence like a gunshot. His face flushed red with rage, voice no longer cold, but unhinged. That recording is fake, he barked, eyes wide, jaw tight. You think some anonymous drive proves anything? That could be anybody, any voice. You think this is justice? This is a damn setup. The room flinched. Reporters whipped their phones back up. A juror gasped audibly. Boone's lawyer reached out, whispering frantically, trying to calm him down. But Boone shook him off, now standing. You people think you can just throw dirt and call it truth. I've put 20 years into this badge. 20 years. I've kept this city safe while politicians and punks sat back and did nothing. Sergeant Boone, Jasmine said, her voice like steel drawn from a sheath. You will sit down, now. But Boone didn't move. His eyes locked on her like a threat waiting for release. It wasn't until the bailiff stepped forward, one hand resting cautiously near his belt, that Boone finally pulled back, still seething, chest rising and falling with fury. Jasmine didn't so much as blink. Then she pulled the next weapon from her arsenal. This, she said, holding up a second sheet of paper, crumpled slightly at the edges, with faded black ink, is the sworn statement of Officer Marisol Kendrick, first responder on the scene. Her testimony was recorded the day after Elijah Trent's death, and then she disappeared. No follow-up, no witness recall, no inclusion in the case file. Jasmine unfolded the page and read aloud, her voice steady as stone. Subject was lying on his side, hands visible, not resisting. He was crying. Asked for help. I saw Sergeant Boone fire his weapon. I did not see a weapon on the subject. He had no weapon. I was later told by my supervisor to omit this incident from my shift report. Signed, dated, and notarized. Gas rippled through the room, this time audible. One juror covered her mouth. Another leaned forward, stunned. Even the stenographer had stopped typing, just watching, eyes wide. Jasmine didn't pause. She wasn't done. Next, she lifted 2 thick binders, one in each hand. What I hold here, she said, raising the one in her left, is the file submitted to this court by the district attorney's office. It shows Sergeant Boone with a spotless record, no disciplinary action, no prior incidents, glowing reviews from superiors. She paused, raised the second binder higher. And this is the federal file from the Fifth Circuit, compiled during a civil inquiry last year. This file includes reports the DA's version omits, complaints, use of force summaries, internal warnings, witness memos. She opened both and laid them side by side on the bench. Let's compare, she said sharply. She pointed to a page. The DA's file lists Boone as receiving a commendation in March of 2021. The Fifth Circuit file shows that during that same month, he was under internal investigation for an undocumented takedown of a minor. That report vanished from the local record, but not from the federal archive. She flipped to another section. Here, 2020, the DA's version, exemplary conduct on duty. The federal version, 2 civilian complaints, both alleging excessive force, both closed without action. One of the victims was hospitalized. The other moved out of state. Neither case made it past initial review. She looked up, her eyes blazing now, not with anger, but with control. This court is being asked to make decisions based on documents that lie, and we are being told, expected, to accept that lie because it's clean, because it's convenient, and because it protects men like Sergeant Boone from being held accountable for the blood they spill. The entire courtroom was still. Even Boone had shifted in his seat for the first time, his posture no longer confident, but calculating, as if he knew something had shifted and not in his favor. Jasmine leaned forward. "I'm not here to play politics. I'm not here to play games. I'm here to make sure this court hears the truth that this system has been bearing for years. And today, that truth has a voice." The air in the courtroom had become dangerously still. Too still. As if everyone sensed the floor beneath them was no longer solid. Jasmine paused only for a breath, scanning the room not as a judge, but as someone who had just turned a silent war into a live battle. And yet she wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. She turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing toward the back row of the observation gallery. "Court recognizes a new witness," she announced suddenly, her voice slicing through the tension. "Mr. Alexander Vance, please stand." There was a ripple of motion, sharp gasps, chairs shifting. A man in his 50s, wiry with salt and pepper hair, and a worn leather notebook clutched in both hands, slowly stood. Until now he'd been silent, anonymous, just another spectator in a packed courtroom. But Jasmine had known he was there. She'd made sure of it. "Mr. Vance," she said, voice steady, "you served as a senior internal affairs investigator from 2004 to 2021. Please confirm, were you ever assigned a case involving Sergeant Victor Boone?" Vance cleared his throat, his voice raw but firm. "Yes, in 2019. "And what happened to that case?" Jasmine asked, leaning forward just enough for the cameras to catch the full gravity of the exchange. "I was ordered to close it," Vance replied, scanning the room as if checking who was listening. "Classified under incomplete evidence. Even though we had witness testimony and body cam metadata." He tightened his grip on the notebook. "I was told by my division head, transfer it into the lost archive. Buried was the word he used." I objected. I was pulled off internal affairs a week later and reassigned to desk work. The room didn't breathe. Jasmine nodded slowly. "So you're telling this court, under oath, that the evidence existed and was suppressed deliberately?" "Yes," Vance said, his voice iron now. "And Boone wasn't the only one protected." It was like throwing gasoline on a courtroom already soaked in tension. A wave of murmurs exploded around the room. A reporter in the second row dropped his notepad. Someone in the jury box whispered, "Oh my God." But it wasn't over. Before Jasmine could speak again, another voice cut through the courtroom like a lightning strike. Young, male, trembling but defiant. "I can't do this anymore," the voice said. Everyone turned. It was one of the courthouse's own officers. A young deputy, barely 30 in a crisp blue uniform, stood from his post near the wall, his hands clenched at his sides. "I can't stand here and pretend this place stands for justice," he continued, louder now, his voice cracking. "Not when evidence is erased, not when voices are buried. I swore to protect this court, but I can't protect a lie." Gasps turned into chaos. Cameras turned toward him. Boone's attorney stood again, shouting over the noise. The bailiff moved forward, unsure of what to do. Restrain him? Escort him out? But Jasmine raised her hand once, just once, and the room froze again. "Let him speak," she ordered. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't surprised. It was measured, firm, undeniable. The young officer looked at her, and then, with visible relief, he simply removed his badge, laid it on the bench near the jury box, and walked out of the room. The courtroom erupted. Dozens of people now talking at once, reporters yelling into microphones, the press pool crowding closer to the rail. Even jurors looked shaken, and still Jasmine didn't move. She stood in the eye of the storm, calm, composed, unshaken. She reached for her gavel, and when she brought it down, it wasn't just a call for order. It was a declaration of finality. Bang! The sound rang out like a shot. "Enough," she said, standing. "This court will now proceed with immediate action." All eyes turned to her. Boone, visibly rattled, looked pale for the first time. His hands were clenched, his shoulders tight, but there was no bravado left in him, just fury and fear. "Based on the new testimony of Mr. Vance and the unauthorized suppression of evidence, I hereby file a motion to initiate criminal investigation into prosecutor Livia Ramsey for obstruction of justice and official misconduct, Jasmine stated clearly, her voice cutting through the noise like thunder through glass. Ramsey blinked rapidly, opening her mouth to object, but no words came. She simply stared, frozen. Jasmine didn't wait. She turned to the bailiff. Further, she declared, in light of Sergeant Boone's direct violation of courtroom conduct, his intimidation of court officers, and emerging evidence of obstruction and conspiracy, this court now orders his immediate detainment pending further investigation. The gallery burst into a frenzy, journalists shouting, jurors gasping, Boone shouting something unintelligible as two bailiffs moved quickly to his side. He tried to resist, but one officer grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back in a single practice motion. The cuffs clicked, loud and final. "You can't do this," Boone snarled. "You don't get to do this to me." Jasmine looked at him one last time, not with anger, but with clarity. "I didn't do this to you," she said. "You did it to yourself. With every lie, every cover-up, every moment you thought power meant immunity." The reporters swarmed forward, shouting questions, the room flashing with light as if history were being written in real time. And Jasmine stood still, letting the noise pass around her like water against stone. This wasn't chaos, it was correction, and she was the one delivering it. There was no need for a gavel. The room was already on the edge of collapse, and Jasmine Crockett, without raising her voice, without flinching, was the one pushing it there. The courtroom was still caught in the aftershock of her evidence barrage when Jasmine slowly closed the two binders in front of her. The sound of paper against wood was like the final click of a locked door. One Boone could no longer open. He sat stiffly now, no longer leaning back in comfort, but forward in quiet panic, his hands clasped too tightly, his breath shorter than before. Across the room, the district attorney stared down at the table, avoiding her eyes. The journalists had stopped taking notes. They were simply watching. Everyone was. Because at that moment, it wasn't just about files or facts or legal codes. It was about the unbearable weight of truth finally being dragged into the light. Jasmine stood tall behind the bench, her voice calm, low, controlled like a knife unsheathed in the dark. She looked Boone directly in the eyes, not with rage, but with certainty, a kind of stillness that only came from surviving too many battles to flinch at one more. "You thought that slap was power," she said, her voice carrying through the marble chamber like it belonged there. "But what you didn't see, what you'll never understand, is that you just handed me the weapon I needed." Her words landed harder than any gavel. "You didn't expect a reaction," she continued, stepping closer to the edge of the bench. "Because men like you are used to silence. You're used to control, used to fear doing your work for you." She paused, then her eyes narrowed. "But not today." She took one breath, just one, then said it, clear, deliberate, and devastating. "You never imagined that slap would be the strike that brings down your entire empire." The room didn't gasp. It didn't erupt. It held its breath, because they all knew it had already started to fall. There was a beat of silence after Jasmine's final words to Boone. Then the entire courtroom began to shift. Not with noise, not yet, but with energy. That quiet, unmistakable current that moves through a room just before something breaks wide open. Boone looked stunned, his jaw locked tight, the sweat now visible along his hairline. And before the ripple of fear could settle into silence again, the defense attorney stood, voice shaking beneath his courtroom-polished tone. "Your Honor," he began, fumbling slightly with the button on his coat. "Given the unexpected nature of the evidence presented and the volatility of this moment, we respectfully request a temporary recess to—" Jasmine didn't let him finish. "Request denied," she said, flat and immediate, cutting through his words like a blade. "This court does not pause for panic, not when the stakes are this high, not when lives were lost under silence." The defense attorney froze, lips parted, but the message was clear. She wasn't giving them a second to regroup. And then it happened. From the corner of the courtroom near the clerk's station, a sound, not a word, not a question, just the high, panicked clatter of a chair falling backward. The courtroom clerk, young, maybe in her late 20s, shaking, stood up so fast her notes flew off the desk. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bag, and without a word she turned and ran for the side exit. One of the bailiffs stepped toward her, unsure whether to stop her or let her go, but Jasmine didn't even glance her way. She knew exactly what was happening. That clerk had seen something, or heard something, or knew something. And now with the cracks forming in real time, she didn't want to be standing on a floor that might collapse. Jasmine's eyes moved to the prosecution table and locked onto the woman seated second from the left. Neatly pressed gray blazer, diamond earrings. A stack of folders clutched a little too tightly. Her nameplate gleamed under the court lights. Livia Ramsey, senior prosecutor. "Ms. Ramsey," Jasmine said, her tone shifting into something colder, heavier, like steel being drawn from a sheath. "Would you kindly step forward and confirm your involvement in the Boone-related cases filed between 2018 and 2023? The courtroom tensed again. Ramsey didn't move at first, but she didn't protest either. Jasmine continued. "You were the acting prosecutor in 5 cases involving Sergeant Boone. All resulted in dropped charges or procedural dismissals. The same signature appears across all 5 closures. Yours." A quiet cough broke the stillness from the jury box. "Now," Jasmine said, reaching under her bench, "this court has just received 3 internal faxes, dated over a 2-year span, originating from your office fax line, all signed with your hand. These documents," she held them up, slowly unfolding them like blades, "instruct subordinates to revise or omit language regarding use of force in final filings for reports involving Victor Boone." A murmur swept the room. Jasmine didn't let the wave build before she drowned it. "This is obstruction. This is tampering. This is collusion at the highest prosecutorial level," she declared, "and it will not go unanswered in this courtroom." Now people began to move. Not a rush, not chaos, but quiet, internal disarray. You could feel it. Eyes shifting, legs crossing, a few reporters typing furiously. One cameraman adjusted his live stream setup and pushed a notification out. "Breaking evidence points to prosecutor collusion. Live now." And then the next fracture came, this time from the jury box. I'm sorry." A middle-aged man, juror number 7, stood, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't continue. I don't feel safe." Everyone turned. "I don't feel safe," he repeated louder now. "Not after this, not with what's being exposed. I'm being asked to make decisions about people who can erase witnesses and rewrite the truth." The bailiff moved toward him. "No, it's fine," Jasmine said, raising her hand calmly. "He's dismissed." The man looked stunned, then nodded quickly and left through the side door. Another domino tipped. The press section began buzzing louder now. The label had already begun to stick. One reporter whispered, loud enough to be picked up by nearby microphones, "This is it. This is the 4-minute turn." Someone else repeated it, on air. Then it spread. Hashtags formed. Screens lit up. In real time, the courtroom became legend. But Jasmine remained unmoved, centered in the eye of the storm. Because for her, this wasn't about theatrics. This was about accountability. She raised the 3 faxes again, speaking directly into the record. "These documents will be submitted to the Department of Justice for immediate review, and if verified," she added, locking eyes with Livia Ramsey, "you will be removed from this case and face federal obstruction charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 1519. Your badge does not protect you from perjury. Your title does not exempt you from consequence." Ramsey's lips parted, but no sound came out. Jasmine turned to the courtroom, now alive with energy, motion, shifting alliances and unraveling confidence. "This," she said, her voice louder now, firm enough to echo past the gallery and out through every live stream camera, "is no longer a routine trial. This is a reckoning, and everyone who chose silence over truth will be held accountable." The air in the courtroom had become dangerously still, too still, as if everyone sensed the floor beneath them was no longer solid. Jasmine paused only for a breath, scanning the room not as a judge, but as someone who had just turned a silent war into a live battle. And yet, she wasn't finished. not by a long shot. She turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing toward the back row of the observation gallery. Court recognizes a new witness, she announced suddenly, her voice slicing through the tension. Mr. Alexander Vance, please stand. There was a ripple of motion, sharp gas, chairs shifting. A man in his 50s, wiry with salt and pepper hair and a worn leather notebook clutched in both hands, slowly stood. Until now, he'd been silent, anonymous. Just another spectator in a packed courtroom. But Jasmine had known he was there. She'd made sure of it. Mr. Vance, she said, voice steady, you served as a senior internal affairs investigator from 2004 to 2021. Please confirm, were you ever assigned a case involving Sergeant Victor Boone? Vance cleared his throat, his voice raw but firm. Yes, in 2019. And what happened to that case? Jasmine asked, leaning forward just enough for the cameras to catch the full gravity of the exchange. I was ordered to close it, Vance replied, scanning the room as if checking who was listening. Classified under incomplete evidence. Even though we had witness testimony and body cam metadata. He tightened his grip on the notebook. I was told by my division head to transfer it into the lost archive. Buried was the word he used. I objected. I was pulled off internal affairs a week later and reassigned to desk work. The room didn't breathe. Jasmine nodded slowly. So you're telling this court, under oath, that the evidence existed and was suppressed deliberately? Yes, Vance said, his voice iron now. And Boone wasn't the only one protected. It was like throwing gasoline on a courtroom already soaked in tension. A wave of murmurs exploded around the room. A reporter in the second row dropped his notepad. Someone in the jury box whispered, "Oh my God." But it wasn't over. Before Jasmine could speak again, another voice cut through the courtroom like a lightning strike. Young, male, trembling but defiant. I can't do this anymore, the voice said. Everyone turned. It was one of the courthouse's own officers. A young deputy, barely 30 in a crisp blue uniform, stood from his post near the wall, his hands clenched at his sides. I can't stand here and pretend this place stands for justice, he continued, louder now, his voice cracking. Not when evidence is erased, not when voices are buried. I swore to protect this court, but I can't protect a lie. Gasps turned into chaos. Cameras turned toward him. Boone's attorney stood again, shouting over the noise. The bailiff moved forward, unsure of what to do. Restrain him? Escort him out? But Jasmine raised her hand once. Just once, and the room froze again. Let him speak, she ordered. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't surprised. It was measured, firm, undeniable. The young officer looked at her, and then, with visible relief, he simply removed his badge, laid it on the bench near the jury box, and walked out of the room. The courtroom erupted. Dozens of people now talking at once. Reporters yelling into microphones, the press pool crowding closer to the rail. Even jurors looked shaken. And still, Jasmine didn't move. She stood in the eye of the storm, calm, composed, unshaken. She reached for her gavel, and when she brought it down, it wasn't just a call for order. It was a declaration of finality. Bang! The sound rang out like a shot. Enough, she said, standing. This court will now proceed with immediate action. All eyes turned to her. Boone, visibly rattled, looked pale for the first time. His hands were clenched, his shoulders tight, but there was no bravado left in him, just fury and fear. Based on the new testimony of Mr. Vance and the unauthorized suppression of evidence, I hereby file a motion to initiate criminal investigation into Prosecutor Livia Ramsey for obstruction of justice and official misconduct, Jasmine stated clearly, her voice cutting through the noise like thunder through glass. Ramsey blinked rapidly, opening her mouth to object. But no words came. She simply stared, frozen. Jasmine didn't wait. She turned to the bailiff. Further, she declared, in light of Sergeant Boone's direct violation of courtroom conduct, his intimidation of court officers, and emerging evidence of obstruction and conspiracy, this court now orders his immediate detainment pending further investigation. The gallery burst into a frenzy, journalists shouting, jurors gasping, Boone shouting something unintelligible as two bailiffs moved quickly to his side. He tried to resist, but one officer grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back in a single practiced motion. The cuffs clicked, loud and final. "You can't do this," Boone snarled. "You don't get to do this to me." Jasmine looked at him one last time, not with anger, but with clarity. "I didn't do this to you," she said. "You did it to yourself, with every lie, every cover-up, every moment you thought power meant immunity." The reporters swarmed forward, shouting questions, the room flashing with light as if history were being written in real time. And Jasmine stood still, letting the noise pass around her like water against stone. This wasn't chaos. It was correction, and she was the one delivering it. The courtroom was still spinning behind her, the echoes of flashing cameras, gasps, shouted questions. But Jasmine Crockett had already stepped into the corridor. She didn't linger for applause, didn't acknowledge the press. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking down the marble floor like a metronome counting down to something bigger. Her breath was steady, but her shoulders carried weight now, new weight. Truth had cracked through the walls of the courtroom, but it came with a price. By the time she reached her chambers, silence inside felt like stepping into another world. No eyes, no whispers, no press. Just her in the aftermath. Jasmine locked the door behind her, walked to the desk, and sat down slowly. Not because she was tired, but because she had to think. Her mind was already 3 moves ahead. Then the phone rang. The sound was sharp, disrespectful even. It didn't come through the secure court line. It came through her personal cell, the one almost no one had access to. She stared at it for a beat before answering. "This is Judge Crockett," she said, voice flat. There was a pause, then a voice. Low, male, smooth like oil over rusted metal. "You just kicked over the wrong nest, Your Honor." She said nothing. "Let me ask you something. How's your boy these days? Still walk home from soccer? That neighborhood's not as safe as it used to be. And your mother? Does she still get her groceries delivered, or is she stepping out again?" Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't breathe. But the silence around her thickened like fog in a dead forest. The voice continued. "You think this ends in a courtroom? You think you can rip masks off without consequences?" "No, Judge. What you did wasn't brave. It was stupid. We don't just survive inside the system. We are the system." Then, click. The line went dead. Jasmine lowered the phone gently onto the desk. Her hands were perfectly still, but inside her chest, something surged. Not fear. Fire. Within 30 seconds, she picked up the red line. The secure court extension connected to federal security response. "This is Judge Jasmine Crockett. I'm ordering 24-hour protective detail starting now. My son Daniel, 11 years old, lives with his grandmother Margot. Address is on file. No contact allowed without clearance. Lockdown protocols effective immediately. Full surveillance. Full background on any movement near the premises." Her voice never wavered. She wasn't asking for safety. She was declaring a perimeter in a war zone. As she hung up, she didn't allow herself even a second of doubt. Instead, she turned to her computer and opened the encrypted federal case archive. The Boone file was just the beginning. What she needed now was the pattern. The rot wasn't one man. It was a decade of silence, rewritten reports, buried lives. She launched a cross-referenced audit. 10 years of Boone's cases, everyone. The data loaded slow, but steady. She scrolled through the results as they poured in. Arrest logs, disciplinary reports, use of force incidents, prosecutorial outcomes. Her screen turned into a graveyard of redacted blocks and missing entry flags. And then the numbers began to speak. 9 separate cases where evidence logs were incomplete. The pattern was too precise to ignore. Same formatting, same language, same clearance codes. Every time Boone had used force resulting in serious injury or worse, key portions of the reports had been flagged unavailable due to technical error or missing supporting documentation. She pulled open the individual case summaries. Case number 2431. Evidence log submitted, but body cam data listed as corrupted. Victim hospitalized. Charges dropped. Victim later deported. Case number 2847. Use of force report filed but lacked audio or visual records. Victim shot twice during a traffic stop. Boone cleared. Case number 3112. No complaint ever filed, but hospital records showed blunt trauma consistent with baton strikes. Internal affairs entry overwritten. All of them buried in silence. Then the fatalities began to surface. 4 dead. 4 victims across 8 years. 1 was 17. 1 was undocumented. 1 was disabled. All were either black or immigrants. All died in what were described as resisted detainments. Not a single conviction. Not even a suspension. Jasmine's chest tightened, not with grief, but with absolute clarity. This wasn't just Boone's story. It was a system engineered to erase people like them, with just enough ink and legalese to look clean on the surface. Then she found it. Case number 1987, the file that stopped her cold. 1 sentence in bold autoscan from the old paper archive. All surveillance data unavailable. Request filed by Prosecutor L. Ramsey for permanent exclusion under discretionary review clause. Ramsey. It wasn't just negligence. It was orchestration. She'd signed it. Not a deputy, not an assistant. Livia Ramsey herself. And the footage wasn't lost. It was erased by court order, under federal statute, and sealed with a protective motion she'd never disclosed to anyone. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. She no longer felt like she was looking at files. She felt like she was standing inside a crime scene. This wasn't incompetence. This was design. She pulled her keyboard closer and opened a secure link to the Office of Judicial Oversight. She dictated a short statement, measured, professional, but piercing. Initiating formal review and internal investigation into all prosecutorial actions related to cases involving Sergeant Victor Boone from 2013-2023. Grounds, pattern of concealed evidence, potential abuse of prosecutorial privilege, and obstruction of judicial transparency. Immediate access requested to all encrypted correspondence logs between ADA Livia Ramsey and local law enforcement task force leaders. She paused before hitting send, not to hesitate, but to prepare for the consequences, because after this, there would be no walking it back. The phone on her desk buzzed again. This time it was Max, her contact in digital forensics. "Jasmine," he said, "I ran the metadata on the files you sent over. Those case logs weren't just tampered with. They were rewritten from scratch. New document trees, new timestamps, everything. This wasn't sloppy. It was systematic. Someone high up built a program to overwrite the original records and log them as archived before they ever hit review." She closed her eyes. Not to block the weight of it, but to focus. This was bigger than a courtroom. It was a machine. And she just found the switch buried under a mountain of silence. "Send me everything," she told Max. "Every log, every name. And Max, don't just trace the files, trace the approvals." Because it was no longer enough to expose Boone. Now she had to name everyone who protected him, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't just holding the gavel anymore. She was writing the blueprint for how to dismantle the entire structure. The office lights were still on when dawn broke across Dallas. Jasmine hadn't slept, not because she couldn't, but because there was no time left to waste. The files were ready, the testimonies organized, the evidence secured in triplicate across federal servers, and her decision was made. No more quiet investigations, no more chess moves in the shadows. It was time to go public. She stood before the press podium that afternoon, in a room packed shoulder to shoulder with reporters from every major network. Federal marshals flanked the entrances. Cameramen lined the aisles like soldiers. The Department of Justice had offered to hold the press conference in D.C., but Jasmine refused. "If it started in Texas," she had said, "it ends in Texas." As she stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. A silence not of anticipation, but of weight. Because the nation knew something big was coming, and they knew Jasmine Crockett didn't speak unless every word was carved from truth. Her voice rang out, steady, clear, and precise. "Today I stand before you not just as a judge, but as a witness, to a decade of buried truths, to a system that protected predators instead of the people, and to a machine that wore the mask of justice while quietly erasing it. She reached into the folder at her side and lifted the first file high enough for the cameras to see. This is the full, unredacted personnel file of Sergeant Victor R. Boone, now in federal custody. The original was tampered with. But this, she held it steady, includes what was erased: 9 missing reports, 4 fatal encounters, and over a dozen instances of falsified evidence, all protected, all buried. The flashbulbs went off in unison. Her image was now everywhere, but she didn't blink. This drive, she continued, pulling out a sleek black USB stick, contains the anonymous recording of Boone confirming the destruction of body cam evidence in the death of Elijah Trent, a 19-year-old boy who had no weapon, no record, and no chance. He died in a ditch, and Boone walked free. Gasps rippled through the room. Hands shot up. Jasmine ignored them. This, she added, lifting another folder, is the sworn statement of Officer Marisol Kendrick, the first responder to Trent's death. Her report was hidden. She was reassigned. The system did what it always does when truth gets too close. It disappeared the messenger. A low murmur swept the gallery. Then came the moment no one expected, but everyone would remember. Jasmine looked up from the podium, eyes hard, unwavering. And now, let's talk about the names. A hush fell, as if even the walls leaned in. Livia Ramsey, Assistant District Attorney, signed the order to permanently erase camera footage from case number 1987. She has since been removed from her post and is under federal investigation. Judge Carlton Baines approved 6 plea deals with missing evidence. Never questioned the redactions. Retired quietly 2 weeks ago. He is now under internal review. Sheriff Paul Renner, involved in 3 cases with Boone, failed to submit internal affairs reports, promoted to head of task force oversight. That ends today. She flipped the final page. These are not isolated errors. They are not clerical mistakes. They are deliberate, coordinated, and devastating. By now, the room was in controlled chaos. Journalists yelling questions over one another, phones vibrating endlessly. Major outlets began cutting live to the feed. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox. Twitter was on fire. Jasmine Crockett drops names. Live federal evidence release. This is the reckoning, but Jasmine's voice never cracked. I am calling for a full, independent federal investigation into the Texas judicial system. Every sealed case, every suspicious clearance, every officer named in a redacted report. No more shadows, no more shields. She paused for breath. We cannot call this justice if justice fears the light. With that, she stepped away from the podium, not to applause, but to shock. And sometimes that silence was louder. It took mere minutes. The media erupted. Clips of the press conference were looped on every major channel. Analysts scrambled to piece together timelines. Op-eds were drafted before sundown. Commentators called it a judicial earthquake. Social media dubbed it the Reckoning Files. TikTok was filled with stitch reactions and side-by-side breakdowns of Boone's cases. Hashtags surged globally. # Justice for Elijah. # Crockett Reckoning. # Boone Unmasked. Then came the political fallout. Within 24 hours, pressure mounted on the governor's office. Protesters gathered outside state courthouses in Austin, Houston, and El Paso. Local DAs were suddenly being asked live on camera about cases they'd buried years ago. 2 congressmen publicly called for DOJ oversight. A third tried to downplay it and was met with a firestorm of backlash. By the 3rd day, the real cracks began to show. 3 judges from the Dallas County Circuit tendered resignation letters, quietly, almost in the dead of night. But they were noticed. One by one, those who had operated comfortably behind the curtain were starting to realize the curtain was gone. Inside courthouses, silence turned into paranoia. Prosecutors double-checked old filings. Clerks reviewed access logs. Internal Affairs received anonymous tips in record numbers. Someone posted a leaked list of every judge who had ever worked with Boone's cases. Dozens of names now under scrutiny. Trust was collapsing. And yet, through it all, Jasmine Crockett remained centered. Not as a celebrity, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had stared down the storm and kept walking. She knew this wasn't over, not even close, but she had done something most people never get to do in their lifetime. She had turned the system's own silence into its most damning confession, and the world had finally heard it. The aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's national press conference rippled through the justice system like a controlled demolition. Investigations were launched, subpoenas issued, inboxes flooded. The truth could no longer be restrained, not by fear, nor rank, nor silence. And now at last, the very people who had weaponized the law against the powerless were facing the one place they had always thought they could control. A courtroom. But this time, not as prosecutors, not as enforcers. As defendants, Sergeant Victor Boone, Ada Livia Ramsey, Captain Paul Renner, Investigator Charles Hyland, Deputy Clerk Serena Kay. All five stood at the defense table as the trial began in the Southern District Federal Courthouse, under the glare of national cameras and guarded by U.S. Marshals. The very hallways where they had once moved like kings and queens of the system were now lined with press, victims' families, and demonstrators holding signs that read, "We remember Elijah. Justice has a name. No more shadows." And seated at the witness stand, no longer in robes, no longer behind the gavel, was Jasmine Crockett. For the first time in her career, she was not here to judge. She was here to testify. She sat tall, dressed in a simple charcoal gray suit, no jewelry but the small gold pin on her lapel that read, "Truth." Her presence silenced the room more powerfully than any court officer's voice ever could. The prosecutor, a federal attorney from Washington named Elaine Brooks, turned to the bench. "Your Honor, the government calls Jasmine Crockett to the stand." There was no hesitation as Jasmine stepped forward. Her oath echoed like thunder in the packed courtroom. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." She took her seat and folded her hands. "Ms. Crockett," Brooks began, "you presided over the Boone hearings before stepping down voluntarily. Why?" Jasmine looked directly at the jury. "Because I discovered I was no longer judging a case. I was watching a conspiracy unfold." Her voice didn't shake. "I received an anonymous flash drive. It contained a recording of Sergeant Boone discussing the deletion of body cam footage after the fatal shooting of Elijah Trent. I compared that against sealed files and discovered evidence of systematic suppression. Witnesses buried, evidence erased, in a chain of signatures that led all the way to this courtroom." She turned her head and met Boone's eyes for the first time since he'd slapped her in that very courtroom months ago. He didn't look back. Brooks continued, "Did you find a pattern?" Jasmine nodded. 9 cases with missing evidence, 4 fatalities, all involved suspects who were either black, undocumented, or mentally ill. All dismissed, all cleared by internal review. And in every one of those, the clearance paperwork included the signature of Ada Ramsey or her staff. The jury took notes with shaking hands. The press was stone silent, recording every word. One reporter whispered to another, "This is history." Brooks walked to the table beside the witness stand and lifted a manila folder. "Ms. Crockett, are you familiar with this file?" Jasmine opened it and nodded. "That's the signed order by Livia Ramsey to suppress digital footage from a 2017 excessive force complaint. The reason listed was storage corruption, but the internal chain shows it was erased by manual override. Under her login credentials." She closed the folder. "It was the moment I knew this wasn't just about one officer. It was an entire hierarchy protecting itself." The courtroom buzzed like a charging wire, tension humming in the walls. Then came the defense. Ramsey's attorney rose, his voice slick and poised. "Ms. Crockett, isn't it possible you overstepped your role as a judge when you launched a parallel investigation?" Jasmine's eyes didn't flinch. "When you're the last line between the people and the truth, you don't ask permission to do the right thing. You just do it." Gasps again. The defense attorney shifted, adjusting his tie, but Jasmine was immovable. "What I saw wasn't technical failure. It was moral collapse." The cross-examination ended. The judge, an appointed federal justice with zero ties to Texas, allowed the jury to take a 10-minute recess. And when they returned, the final phase began. The victims took the stand. The mother of Elijah Trent spoke through tears. The sister of Marcus Navarez, a construction worker mistaken for a fugitive and beaten unconscious, testified with her brother's photo in hand. One by one, The system's ghost came back into the light. Then came closing arguments. Brooke stood, fire in her voice, steel in her spine. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this isn't just about Sergeant Boone pulling a trigger. It's about a legal system that handed him the gun, looked the other way when he loaded it, and burned the paperwork afterward. Boone may have pulled the trigger, but Livia Ramsey reloaded it, and Paul Renner pointed it. She let the silence grow. Your verdict isn't just for the people who died. It's for every name we'll never know, because the evidence to prove they existed was destroyed. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The nation held its breath. And then, finally, the court reconvened. The foreperson rose, hands trembling, voice steady. In the case of the United States versus Victor R. Boone, we find the defendant guilty of abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and falsifying official records. Boone didn't move. In the case of Livia Ramsey, we find the defendant guilty of willful suppression of evidence and aiding criminal misconduct. Gasps, tears, applause swelling from the gallery, quickly silenced by a gavel strike. But the emotion was uncontrollable. Guilty. It had been spoken, not whispered, not delayed, not hidden in bureaucracy. Spoken. And Jasmine? She didn't smile, didn't cry. She simply bowed her head for a moment, a quiet goodbye to every soul the system had tried to erase. Then she rose from the stand and walked out through the front doors, this time not as a judge, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a woman who did what the world told her was impossible. She made the system face itself, and it blinked. The verdict echoed across the country like a final bell in a long, brutal fight. Justice, long bent, had snapped back into place, even if only for a moment. Jasmine Crockett had not only exposed a deeply rooted conspiracy, but forced the legal system to confront the rot inside its own bones. Headlines praised her, op-eds called her a modern-day crusader, and across the nation, people used her name like a shield. For the first time in decades, courtrooms were filled not just with arguments, but hope. But Jasmine didn't stay to enjoy the victory. Just 3 days after the sentencing of Victor Boone and Livia Ramsey, Jasmine stood in front of the same podium where she had once shattered the silence of a corrupt system. This time the cameras were already rolling before she stepped into frame. The air was colder, the sky grayer, and yet there was a kind of peace in the wind. She adjusted the microphone herself. No assistance, no security detail flanking her. Just Jasmine, the woman who had once stood behind a judge's bench, now stood eye to eye with the people she had fought for. Good afternoon, she began, her voice low but unwavering. This will be my final press conference as a sitting officer of the court. A ripple moved through the press pit. Pens paused. Reporters leaned in. Jasmine continued. Effective immediately, I am resigning my post. Not because I have lost faith in justice, but because I finally understand what justice requires. She let the words land. There was no sorrow in her tone, only clarity. For years, I believed that the robe was enough, that the courtroom, the bench, the seal above our heads, those were the tools that kept the law pure. But I was wrong. The system, like any machine, is only as clean as the hands that run it, and we have allowed too many dirty hands to touch what should have been sacred. The silence was no longer professional. It was personal. The room felt it. This country doesn't just need better judges, it needs better watchers. People who are unafraid to ask the hard questions, even when the answers make us uncomfortable. We need eyes in the dark corners. We need accountability that doesn't wear a badge and isn't bound by red tape. She took out a folded document from the inside pocket of her blazer. That's why I'm launching a new initiative, a non-governmental watchdog organization, independent, transparent, and relentless. Its name is the Watchtower of Justice. A few reporters gasped softly. Jasmine smiled, not warmly, but knowingly. The Watchtower will review prosecutorial decisions. It will audit police conduct. It will chase the documents that vanish, the witnesses who are silenced, and the cases that disappear from official records. And it will not stop, not when pressured, not when threatened, not when told to sit down. Her voice rose slightly, like a note held just long enough to tremble. I will no longer be a judge, but I will never stop judging this system until it earns the trust it so casually demands. The moment grew, and then Jasmine leaned slightly forward, eyes sharper than ever, voice quieter, but somehow heavier. Some of you may remember the moment this fight began, a moment when a man struck me in open court and expected the world to look away. She paused. He thought he'd silenced me. She looked directly into the nearest camera now. Through it, every viewer watching. But that slap didn't knock me down. It cracked something open. A fracture in the foundation of a system I had once pledged my life to protect. She exhaled, not from exhaustion, but release. And it's through that fracture that the light finally came in. She unfolded her resignation letter, signed, sealed, final. This chapter ends today, but the work, the real work, is just beginning. Behind her, the banner for Watchtower of Justice had been raised, a lighthouse, a symbol, not of law, but of watchfulness. Reporters shouted questions. What would her first investigations be? Would they focus only on Texas? Would they have legal authority? Jasmine answered only one. Our authority, she said, will come from truth, and truth doesn't need permission. As she stepped away from the microphone, the applause began, not from politicians or press, but from the people standing outside the barricades, survivors, activists, families holding framed photos of loved ones who never got their day in court. And Jasmine? She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She walked forward, not away from the system, but toward what comes after. The image of Jasmine Crockett walking away from the courthouse, head high, resignation in hand, purpose in her stride, became one of the most replayed video clips in America that year. It was broadcast on the evening news, analyzed on primetime panels, clipped and shared across every platform from TikTok to C-SPAN. But more than that, it was felt in classrooms, in courtrooms, in homes where justice had long been a word people whispered, not trusted. Her name was no longer just associated with one trial. It had become a signal that someone had finally stood up to the machine from the inside. From Seattle to Savannah, her story was taught in criminal law lectures and judicial ethics seminars. Professors played the courtroom recording of her confronting Boone, pausing mid-sentence to let students sit in the weight of her words. In halls once dominated by silent portraits of pale men in robes, you could now find her photo. Jasmine Crockett, former judge, relentless witness. Not because she was perfect, but because she refused to stay silent in a system built on it. Law schools began hosting symposiums titled The Crockett Doctrine, inviting students to discuss not just constitutional interpretation, but moral courage. In Chicago, a group of new public defenders opened a small pro bono firm and called it the 4-Minute Council, a nod to the moment she turned a slap into a national reckoning. In Atlanta, a graduating class of prosecutors took an oath on a mural of her face, beneath the quote that had shaken the walls of the courtroom. You never imagined that slap would be the strike that brings down your entire empire. But it wasn't just students who followed her. It was junior clerks who no longer looked the other way. It was rookie officers who challenged senior ones. It was federal interns who copied every sealed file they were told to lose. And above all, it was the ordinary people, those who had always felt like the law was a locked door with no key. Now they saw in Jasmine what they had always needed to believe, that justice isn't something handed down from power. It's something claimed by those who won't bow to it. Because the lesson she left behind wasn't about bravery, it wasn't about brilliance, it was about refusal. Refusal to let a title define your limits. Refusal to believe that authority equals righteousness. Refusal to sit quietly when truth is being erased in real time. And as Watchtower of Justice grew, receiving thousands of tips, tracking dozens of shadowed cases, one truth became painfully clear. Jasmine Crockett didn't break the system. She showed the world where it was already broken. And from those fractures, a new generation rose, one that didn't need a bench to bring justice or a robe to speak truth. They carried her fire forward, lit not by status, but by resolve. Because in the end, Jasmine taught them the most important truth of all. Justice does not come from a title. It comes from the refusal to kneel when the law forgets how to stand. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.